I wasn't supposed to be flying that day. It was a last-minute booking, the kind I usually avoided with a toddler in tow. But my aunt had taken a bad fall back in Kansas City, and I didn't have the heart to say no. So there we were, just past 6 a.m., waiting at Gate 42 of the Denver airport, me sipping lukewarm coffee, and my son Jonah curled up against my chest, half asleep in his dinosaur hoodie. I'd gone out of my way to look as invisible as possible. Hoodie up, no makeup, hair in a lazy bun. Just another tired single mom in a crowded terminal, one more story no one would bother to ask about. And yet, someone did notice. I felt it before I saw it. A sensation, like my body recognized something before my mind caught up. My eyes lifted, slow, reluctant, and that's when I saw him. Standing less than 30 feet away. Blue-gray suit, coat slung over one shoulder, coffee in hand. Same sharp jawline, same impossibly still presence in a sea of motion. Eli Whitaker. He didn't look like he belonged in an airport. He never did. Even back then, when we used to joke about catching red-eyes to nowhere, he always stood apart. Like he was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe he wouldn't see me. That I could just turn, quietly disappear into the crowd, and let the moment dissolve like breath on glass. But then it happened. His eyes locked on mine. And then they dropped. To the boy in my arms. To Jonah. And in that instant, I saw something flicker in his expression. A pause. A question. Maybe even recognition. My heart dropped. I turned so fast I nearly spilled the coffee all over Jonah's blanket. I whispered something like, "Hold on, sweetie," even though he wasn't awake enough to understand. My pulse was racing, my breath shallow, my legs numb. I moved through the crowd like a woman running from a fire. Past gates, past vending machines, past strangers with suitcases and earbuds, and no idea that the ground had just shifted under someone's feet. I didn't stop until I reached a corner near a janitor's closet and pressed my back against the wall. Jonah stirred. I kissed the top of his head. He smelled like baby shampoo and Cheerio dust. I stood there, trembling. It had been almost 4 years since I last saw Eli. 3 years and 10 months, to be exact, since the day I drove away without telling him I was pregnant, without telling him anything at all. I had my reasons. God knows I had my reasons. And for a long time, I convinced myself I'd made the right call, that he didn't need to know, that Jonah didn't need him. But now I wasn't so sure, because I'd seen his face, and worse, he'd seen Jonah's. And I knew Eli Whitaker. If he saw something, if he even suspected something, he wouldn't let it go. I closed my eyes and whispered to no one, "Please don't find me." But deep down, I knew better. Eli always found what he was looking for. I didn't stop shaking for the next 20 minutes. Even after we boarded, even after I buckled Jonah into the window seat and handed him his juice box, my hands trembled like I'd just come in from a storm. The flight attendant asked if I was okay. I smiled too hard and said, "I just didn't sleep well." She nodded and moved on. I think she believed me. But I hadn't just lost sleep. I'd lost control. That look in Eli's eyes, when he saw Jonah, kept looping in my mind like a scene from a film I didn't want to watch. That half-second pause. That shift in his expression. It wasn't just surprise. It was recognition. Intuition. The kind of look you can't train yourself to give unless something deep inside you knows. Jonah was quiet, tracing shapes on the frosted window with one finger. He had Eli's hands, long fingers, square knuckles. I'd never told anyone that, not even myself, not out loud. The first few months after I gave birth, I used to stare at Jonah while he slept, studying every angle of his face, waiting for pieces of Eli to appear. I told myself I didn't care, that I could raise him on my own, that I didn't need permission or validation. But I lied. Every time he smiled sideways, every time he tilted his head while thinking, every time he asked a question with more curiosity than most adults dared, it was like Eli's ghost had moved in with us. And now, that ghost was flesh and blood again, tall and real, and staring across a crowded airport terminal. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the tarmac blur as the plane pulled away from the gate. In my chest, a quiet dread took hold. I wasn't just flying to Kansas City anymore. I was flying away from something, or someone. But how far could I go? Eli wasn't like most people. He noticed things, remembered things, picked up on the kinds of details others missed. That's what made him brilliant. And dangerous. If he suspected that Jonah was his, he wouldn't just shrug and walk away. He'd dig, he'd chase, he'd follow the thread until he unraveled the whole story. And then what? What would I even say if he showed up at my door? Hi. Yes. Surprise. You have a 3-year-old son. I didn't tell you because... What? Because I was scared? Because I believed your mother when she said I wasn't good for you? Because I didn't think you'd fight for us? The thing is, I'd convinced myself that Eli didn't want a family, that he belonged to another world. A world of pitch decks and venture capital and tech awards and TED Talks, not diaper bags and preschool snacks and midnight coughs. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I was the one who didn't belong. I glanced down at Jonah. His head was tilted toward the window again, eyes fluttering shut. Peaceful, unaware. He had no idea what kind of domino I might have just tipped over. I should have stayed hidden. I should have kept our lives small, manageable, safe. But fate, if you believe in that kind of thing, has a cruel sense of humor. Of all the terminals in all the cities in all the world, Eli had to be standing in mine. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The seatbelt light chimed off. I reached for the baby wipes in my bag, even though I didn't need them, just to keep my hands busy. Then I caught myself in the reflection of the window. I looked older than I remembered. Not in a bad way. Just real. Like someone who'd lived through things. Someone who had made hard choices. Someone who had carried a secret for 3 years and now couldn't carry it much longer. Running had been easy. At first. But running forever? I wasn't sure I had it in me. Before the magazine covers, before the 5-story office downtown and the interviews on finance podcasts and his face on investor panels, before all of that, Eli Whitaker was just a guy who fixed bikes for extra cash and drank black coffee like it was a religion. And I was the girl who walked into his garage with a busted tire and a skeptical look. We met the summer I moved to Boulder. I'd taken a job teaching art at the community center and was still living on frozen burritos and secondhand furniture. My car was falling apart, so was my sense of direction. And Eli, well, he was the opposite of everything I was used to. Quiet. Focused. Like the world was too loud and he was just trying to make it make sense. The first time we spoke, he barely looked at me. He pointed at my bike, asked if I'd hit a curb, and said something like, "Could have been worse." Not exactly charming, but he was honest, and I liked that. Over the next few weeks, I kept finding excuses to stop by. Sometimes it was my brakes. Sometimes just air in the tires. Sometimes I didn't even have a problem. I just wanted to hear him talk about torque ratios or gear alignment or whatever else gave him that thoughtful crease between his eyebrows. Eventually, we started getting lunch, then dinner, then nights that bled into mornings. He had this way of making everything feel simple, even when life wasn't. He listened without interrupting. Thought before speaking. He made me feel seen in a way no one ever had. I told him things I didn't tell anyone. About my mom dying when I was 15. About how I still talk to her sometimes, just in case she could hear. About my fear of being too much or not enough, depending on the day. He didn't flinch. He never pulled away. Instead, he told me about his adoptive parents, how they were kind but distant, more focused on legacy than love, how he'd always wanted to build something of his own, not for the money, but for the freedom. He said he wasn't afraid of hard work, just of wasting it. There was a night late September, maybe when we lay on the roof of his apartment watching satellites blink across the sky. He turned to me and said, "I don't know what this is yet, but it feels like something I shouldn't mess up." And I said, "Then don't." We laughed. Back then I thought love was enough. But things started shifting when his first app took off. Nothing major, just momentum. A few interviews, calls from tech guys in San Francisco, small funding offers. I was proud of him, of course I was, but I started noticing the change, not in how he treated me. Eli never stopped being kind, but in how others started treating him, especially his mother Marianne. She'd always been polite with me, distant, but not cruel, until money got involved. Then came the comments, the veiled questions. The "Is Rachel still teaching art?" and "I suppose you'll outgrow Boulder soon?" Things meant to sound casual, but never were. Eli didn't notice, or maybe he did and didn't want to make a thing of it. But I noticed, and slowly, that simple little life we'd built started to feel fragile, like something that could crack under too much pressure. I told myself we'd be fine, that love could hold it all. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she called. I remember because I was grading student sketches and trying to ignore the fact that Eli had been gone for 3 days straight on some investor trip in Palo Alto. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something in my stomach twisted the second I heard her voice. "Rachel, darling, do you have a moment?" Marianne Whitaker never called me. She'd seen me a dozen times at dinners and fundraisers, always with a polite smile and a glass of wine she never really sipped. But calling me, that was new. She asked me to meet her at a cafe near the museum. Neutral ground, she called it. I almost didn't go. I should have trusted that feeling in my gut. She was already seated when I arrived, a porcelain teacup in front of her, untouched. She looked perfectly composed, blazer sharp, nails done, hair pinned back like nothing could ever move out of place. She smiled as I sat down, like we were old friends. Then she got to it. "I thought we should speak, woman to woman." Her tone was soft, controlled. She never raised her voice, not once. But every word felt like a thread pulling tight around my ribs. She told me Eli had potential, that his app wasn't just a fluke, but a gateway, that serious people were finally taking him seriously, and that this moment right now was the most important in his life. Then she looked at me. You're kind, creative, and clearly Eli cares for you, but you know as well as I do that this thing between you isn't built for where he's going. I didn't answer. My mouth had gone dry. She kept going. Do you want to be the reason he gets distracted? Or worse, the reason he hesitates when opportunity knocks? She let that hang in the air, like smoke from an invisible fire. Then came the part that made my blood go cold. I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to consider what's best for him, and for yourself. She reached into her bag and slid something across the table. An envelope. I'm not paying you off, she said, as if that made it better. But I'm offering you options. Freedom, if you choose it. I didn't open it. I didn't touch it. I just stared at her, trying to figure out how a woman could say all that without once sounding cruel, without ever raising her voice. It was surgical, almost elegant. A dismantling disguised as concern. And the worst part? A small, broken part of me believed her. Not because she was right, but because she said it with such conviction, I started to doubt everything I thought I knew. What if she was right? What if Eli's future was too big, too fast, too polished for someone like me? What if loving him was the most selfish thing I could do? I left without the envelope, but the damage was done. That night, I sat alone on the floor of our apartment, watching the lights blink outside the window. Eli called. I didn't answer. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks later, and I never told him. Something about that kid's eyes wouldn't leave me alone. I boarded my flight like normal, sat through the safety announcements, and even pulled out my laptop like I planned to work. But the screen stayed black. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, useless. Those eyes. I knew them, not because they were familiar in the general sense, but because they were mine. Same color, same shape, same way of squinting when focused. I'd seen them in the mirror for 35 years, and now I'd seen them again, in the face of a little boy. The woman holding him, her face had disappeared into the blur of that moment. But it came back to me slowly, like a song you haven't heard in years but somehow still remember the words to. Rachel. I hadn't seen her in almost 4 years, not since she walked out of my life without a single explanation. No goodbye, no I'm sorry, no note on the counter, just gone. At first, I thought something had happened, an accident, a misunderstanding. I called, I texted, I showed up at her place, empty. Then came the anger, the questions, the slow, suffocating realization that I didn't have answers and probably never would. I buried myself in work, pitched harder, built faster, the company grew, I grew colder. And now she was here, at an airport in Denver, looking like a woman trying not to be seen, with a child. With my child? I couldn't say for sure. I didn't have facts, only a gut feeling that hit harder than logic ever could. So I started digging. Not out of rage, not even out of curiosity, but because something inside me, the part that used to believe in the truth, wouldn't let this sit. I pulled out my old phone that night, the one I hadn't touched in years, buried in the back of a drawer, dead and dusty. I charged it, flipped through old texts, photos, anything that could lead me to her. There wasn't much. Rachel had never been online the way most people were. No trail of hashtags or check-ins, no digital fingerprints, The few pictures I had were grainy shots from hikes, cafe corners, bookstore aisles. Always candid, always beautiful. I called a friend. Miles, my college roommate turned PI for hire. He owed me a favor. I gave him the only detail I had. Her name's Rachel. She was in Denver this week, traveling with a kid, maybe 3 years old. He whistled. That's thin, Whitaker. Yeah, I said, but so am I right now. He promised to call if anything turned up. I sat alone in my apartment that night, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the city lights. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about profits or pitches. I was thinking about a pair of eyes that looked too much like mine to be coincidence. 3 days had passed since the airport. I'd convinced myself it was over, that maybe Eli hadn't seen us clearly, that he'd gone on with his flight, poured himself into some investor deck, and let it all blur behind him like the rest of our story. I went through the motions, unpacked Jonah's suitcase, caught up on emails, watered the plants I always forgot about. I even slept with my phone on silent, like I was daring the universe not to interrupt. But the truth clung to me like smoke. I kept replaying the exact angle of Eli's eyes, how long he looked at Jonah, that flicker of recognition, like a thread pulling tight. Still, I said nothing, until Jonah broke the silence for me. We were walking home from the library. The sun was dipping low, casting that soft, forgiving light that made everything look calmer than it really was. He was holding my hand, swinging it back and forth like he always did when he was thinking. And then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Mommy, who was that man?" I stopped mid-step. I hadn't told him anything, not about the airport, not about the man who stared too long. I didn't even know he'd noticed. I crouched to meet his eyes. "What man, sweetheart?" "At the airport," he said, brows furrowed. He looked at me like he knew me. There was no accusation in his voice, just simple curiosity, the kind that only makes things harder because it's pure. I opened my mouth to lie, to say it was no one. A stranger. Someone I used to know. But nothing came out, because he wasn't a stranger, and I had known him. And my silence was no longer just about protecting myself. It was a wall I was building around Jonah, too, one brick at a time. He tilted his head. "Mommy, you're doing that quiet thing again." I let out a shaky breath and smiled the way you do when you're buying time. "I'm sorry, baby. I just didn't expect that question." He leaned into my chest, wrapping his arms around my neck like he always did when he sensed I needed grounding more than he did. "I liked his eyes," he whispered. "They looked like mine." I felt something in my throat tighten so fast I had to blink to keep from falling apart. He was right, of course. They did look alike. That soft storm blue with hints of gray, the way they squinted when curious, the eyes that watched everything, questioned everything. Just like Eli. I kissed the top of Jonah's head and stood up, holding his hand a little tighter than before. I didn't answer his question that day, but it was the first time I realized I couldn't outrun it anymore. Later that night, after he fell asleep curled against his pillow, I sat on the kitchen floor with a mug of cold tea I never drank and stared at the wall like it might offer me instructions. I'd lived a whole life in hiding, from one man, but now the question wasn't about me. It was about a boy who deserved answers, and a man who might deserve the truth. I walked to the bedroom, pulled open the bottom drawer of my dresser, and stared at the box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a single photo. Grainy, from our last trip together. Eli holding a map upside down, me laughing behind the camera. We looked ridiculous, happy, young. I held it for a long time. Then I reached for my phone. I didn't text him. I didn't call. But I opened a browser and typed in his name. I just wanted to see what he looked like now. I wasn't ready to face him. But I was starting to understand that the longer I waited, the more Jonah would notice. And the next time he asked, I might not be able to lie. There are moments in life when your feet move before your heart is ready. Mine did. I drove 2.5 hours south, past towns I'd never heard of, past gas stations with broken signs and empty fields that looked like they hadn't seen rain in months. Jonah slept most of the way, his little head bobbing gently with the motion of the car. I didn't play music. I needed the silence to hear myself think, which, as it turned out, wasn't a great idea. My thoughts weren't kind. They asked me what I thought I was doing, what I expected to happen, whether I wanted Eli to be angry or relieved, confused or devastated, whether I was showing up to tell the truth or just to feel less guilty. I didn't have answers. All I had was a small slip of paper with an address Miles had found for me. Eli had moved into a modern townhouse near the city center glass, metal, clean lines, the kind of place with a doorman and too much security, the kind of place I used to joke he'd hate. I parked a block away. Jonah was still asleep when I stopped the car. I didn't wake him. I just sat there, both hands gripping the wheel, staring down a street I hadn't walked in years. I told myself I wouldn't cry. I lied. My chest tightened the second I saw the front steps, so familiar and yet unreachable. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and breathed in so deep it hurt. Then I got out of the car. I walked slowly, holding Jonah in one arm, his blanket draped over my shoulder, more for comfort than warmth. Every step felt like it echoed inside me. I reached the door, stood there. My hand hovered inches from the doorbell, and I froze, because once I pressed that button, there was no undoing it, no going back to silence, no more hiding behind distance and time. He would answer. He would see, and everything I'd worked so hard to bury would come back up like a wave I couldn't stop. Jonah stirred on my shoulder, and that was what did it. That little sigh he made when he adjusted his weight, his face pressing against my collarbone like it was the only place in the world he trusted. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Nothing happened for a few seconds, long enough for doubt to slip back in, long enough for me to wonder if I should turn around and pretend this never happened. Then the door opened, and there he was, Eli, barefoot, t-shirt slightly wrinkled, hair tousled like he'd been working or pacing or both. He looked at me like a man trying to make sure what he was seeing wasn't a dream or a trick. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes dropped to Jonah, and he didn't speak either. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then Jonah stirred again, lifted his head, and looked up at the man standing in the doorway, and said, quietly, "Hi." Eli's face didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. I saw his breath catch. I finally spoke. "I wasn't going to come." His voice, when it came, was low. "But you did?" I nodded, and that was the only thing either of us could agree on, at least for now. Eli stepped aside and gestured wordlessly for us to come in. I hesitated for half a second, then walked through the doorway like I was stepping into a different version of my own life. The air inside smelled like cedar and something faintly herbal. Probably the same soap he'd always used. Clean, subtle, just like him. Jonah was still tucked into my shoulder, quiet but awake. I could feel his eyes scanning the new space, curious but calm. He always watched first. Just like his father. Eli closed the door gently behind us. "Sit," he said softly, nodding toward the couch. I nodded back and sat down, shifting Jonah into my lap. The silence felt thick, but not cold. It was the silence of two people trying to figure out what language they used to speak. Eli stood across from me, hands in his pockets, not moving, just looking. He wasn't angry, at least not visibly. He was something quieter, something heavier, like someone watching a tide come in and knowing there's nothing they can do to stop it. His voice, when it came, was even, careful. "Is he mine?" I didn't flinch. I didn't try to dodge or spin or stall. I just looked him in the eye and said the one word I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times but had never said aloud. "Yes." His face didn't change, not immediately, but something behind his eyes cracked, not in a dramatic, falling to pieces way, more like a tremor you can't see but feel in your bones. He walked a few steps toward the window and leaned against the frame, facing away from me. One hand on the glass, one on his forehead. He stayed that way for almost a minute. I didn't interrupt. Jonah leaned his head against my chest again, half asleep, oblivious to the fact that he'd just shifted the axis of someone's entire world. Finally, Eli spoke. "How long have you known?" "Since the beginning," I said quietly. He turned his head just slightly, enough to let me see the edge of disbelief in his profile. "And you weren't going to tell me?" I swallowed. I didn't know how. "You didn't know how to call? To write? To send a damn email?" His voice was still controlled, but I heard the pain now, and the disbelief, and something else underneath both grief. I nodded slowly. "I was scared." He turned fully to face me. "Of what? That I'd walk away? That I'd ruin things? Or that I'd want to be involved?" I shook my head. "I didn't know what you'd want, and I didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for." His jaw clenched. "You never even gave me the chance." The truth of that landed harder than I expected. He was right. Whatever else I told myself over the years about protecting Jonah, about protecting Eli, I'd made a choice. One that wasn't mine alone to make. "I'm sorry," I said. It wasn't enough. Of course it wasn't, but it was the only honest thing I could give him in that moment. He looked down, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a long breath. Then his eyes drifted back to Jonah, finally really looking at him. "Does he know?" "No," I whispered. "He doesn't know who you are." Eli nodded, more to himself than to me. "What's his name?" "Jonah." He smiled at that, barely, but it was there. The first crack in the wall between us. "That was your grandfather's name, wasn't it?" I blinked. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." For a second, I saw the old Eli, the one who used to remember how I took my tea or which page I'd left off on in whatever book I left on the nightstand. The man who loved quietly, but completely. Jonah stirred and opened his eyes. Eli took a cautious step closer, kneeling slowly so he was at eye level. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "You feeling okay?" Jonah nodded sleepily. "Are you Mommy's friend?" Eli looked up at me. For the first time that night, he looked completely unsure of what to say. I stepped in. "He's someone important," I said softly. "Someone who's going to be around." Jonah blinked once, then turned back to Eli. "You look like me." Eli smiled, this time full and unmistakable. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I do." The next morning, I found Eli in the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine like it had personally offended him. He was wearing the same shirt as the night before, wrinkled and slightly off-center. His hair was a mess. There was a smear of toothpaste near the collarbone he hadn't noticed. This was not the version of Eli Whitaker the world usually saw, the poised founder, the polished speaker, the man with answers. This was just a man who hadn't slept, who'd had the floor of his reality pulled out from under him 12 hours ago. And still, he looked up and tried to smile when Jonah padded in behind me, dragging his blanket across the hardwood floor. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice rasped with exhaustion. Jonah blinked up at him, then said, very seriously, "Do you have cereal?" Eli paused like he'd just been handed a final exam in a language he didn't speak. "I think so," he replied, turning to open cabinets one by one like he wasn't even sure where his own food lived. I stepped in, gently redirecting. "There's a box of O's behind the coffee mugs. 3rd cabinet." He found it, awkwardly poured some into a bowl, then stared at the fridge like it was judging him. "Milk?" "Top shelf." He nodded, retrieved it, and poured way too much. Jonah didn't complain. He climbed into one of the kitchen stools and started eating with the intensity of a kid who took breakfast very seriously. Eli sat across from him, watching quietly. I could tell he didn't know what to say, or do, or feel. He just didn't want to leave the room. Jonah looked up between spoonfuls. "Why are you staring?" Eli blinked. "Sorry. I'm just trying to figure out who you are." Jonah considered this. "I'm Jonah. I'm 4.5. I like dinosaurs and juice and running really fast, but only in socks." Eli chuckled. It was small, but real. "I used to like those things too," he said. Jonah narrowed his eyes like he didn't totally buy that, but kept eating anyway. I leaned against the counter, watching them. This strange, gentle dance between two people connected by blood, but separated by time. Eli wasn't doing anything particularly right. He wasn't telling jokes or making grand gestures. He looked overwhelmed, off balance, like he was afraid to say the wrong thing. But he was trying, and that meant everything. After breakfast, Jonah insisted on building a fort in the living room. I helped him arrange the couch cushions and throw blankets, and he declared it a no grown-ups except for one zone. He pointed at Eli. "You can come in, but you have to take your shoes off." Eli glanced at me like he needed permission. I nodded. He toed off his shoes and crawled into the tiny fabric cave, ducking under a corner of the blanket with his knees nearly to his chest. Jonah handed him a toy flashlight. "This is in case of lava monsters," he explained. Eli smiled, flicked the light on, and said, "Got it." I stood in the hallway, out of sight, watching through the sliver of a doorway. And for the first time since showing up on his doorstep, I let myself exhale. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't ready. But he was here. And that was more than I ever thought I'd get. That night, after Jonah had fallen asleep on the couch with a plastic dinosaur in each hand and a blanket tangled around his legs, Eli offered to carry him to bed. He did it carefully, like he was holding something more fragile than a child, like he was afraid Jonah might vanish if he moved too fast. I followed them down the hallway, watched Eli lower him onto the guest bed we'd set up together, pull the blanket over his chest, and linger a second too long before stepping back. "He sleeps like you," Eli whispered. I smiled faintly. Flat on his back, like he's charging for battle. We stood there in the doorway, both of us staring at this small boy who somehow held the best and most terrifying parts of us in one tiny frame. When we went back to the living room, the silence between us stretched again. Not sharp, not cold, but heavy, like everything we hadn't said was waiting on the rug between us. Eli finally broke it. I don't even know where to start. I sat down across from him, tucking my knees under me, wrapping my cardigan tight like armor. "You don't have to start anywhere. This isn't a test." He looked down at his hands. "It feels like one." I wanted to tell him I understood, that I was just as overwhelmed, that I didn't expect him to have the right answers, only to show up. But what came out instead was something I hadn't meant to say out loud. "I don't know if I can trust you." His head snapped up. Not in anger, just surprise, like he hadn't considered that possibility, that I, the one who left, the one who kept the secret, might be the one still holding back. "I'm trying," he said. "I know," I replied, softer now. "I see that." He waited, like he knew there was more coming, and there was. But I've spent the last 4 years keeping my world small so it wouldn't fall apart, and now suddenly, it's not small anymore. He nodded slowly. "You think I'll leave?" I didn't answer right away, because yes, that was it. But not just leave in the literal sense. I was afraid he'd start, and then stop. That Jonah would get used to him and then lose him. That I'd get used to him again, and then remember what it felt like to wake up alone. "I'm afraid of what happens if you decide this isn't what you want," I said. "Not just for me, for him." Eli leaned forward, elbows on knees, his eyes never leaving mine. "I can't undo what you went through. I can't change the fact that I wasn't there, and I'm not going to pretend I'm ready for all of this. But I am here." I believed him. That didn't mean the fear went away, but it softened, just enough to let me breathe. "I need to take this slow," I said. "I need to protect him first." "Of course. And I need you to understand that I'm not asking for anything from you right now except consistency." He nodded. "That I can do." We sat like that for a while, the air quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and the city outside the windows. Not quite healed, not quite broken, just trying. And that was more than I'd dared hope for. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that smelled like strawberries and fresh bread. The farmer's market stretched across 2 city blocks, dotted with white tents and too many toddlers on leashes. Jonah was holding my hand, pointing out every jar of honey and every dog he passed. For a moment, it felt like things were normal. Which is why I didn't see her coming. I was distracted by Jonah asking if he could have a peach when I heard her voice, cool even, dipped in silk and poison. "Well, I wondered when you'd crawl back." I froze. The sound was unmistakable, like biting into a cherry and finding a pit. I turned, slowly, and there she was. Marianne Whitaker, still immaculate, cashmere sweater draped over her shoulders like a cape, sunglasses perched perfectly in her highlighted hair. She looked out of place among the fruit crates and burlap banners, but her posture made the crowd part for her anyway. "Jonah," I said quietly, "go pick out the best peach you can find, okay?" He didn't argue, just nodded and skipped ahead to a nearby stand. Marianne's eyes followed him with the cold curiosity of someone inspecting something expensive she hadn't ordered. "He looks just like him," she said. I didn't respond. She stepped closer, lowering her sunglasses to look me full in the face. "You must think this is very brave." "I'm not here to make a statement," I said. "I'm here because my son deserves his father. That's it." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Don't pretend this is about nobility. You had 4 years to come forward. You chose now, when Eli's company is going public, when every journalist in the state is watching him." I crossed my arms, forcing myself to stay still. "I didn't know. I don't care about that." "But others will," she said. "The story writes itself. Abandoned girlfriend returns with child right before IPO. Do you think investors like instability? Do you think boards like surprises?" I felt something in my chest tighten. "I'm not here for his money," I said, "or his spotlight. I don't want anything from you." Her expression didn't change, but her voice dropped lower. "You already took something, his focus, his future. Don't pretend you're harmless." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I held my ground. "You were the one who told me to disappear." "I was protecting him." "No, you were controlling him." She straightened her shoulders, the first real crack in her performance. "You think because you have a child you hold the cards now. But I built Eli's world long before you ever wandered into it." I stepped forward. "And I'm not trying to tear it down, but you don't get to threaten me anymore." Marianne's voice lost its veneer for just a second. "Then be smart. Walk away, quietly." I shook my head. He deserves to know his son. And Jonah deserves to know who he is. I'm not disappearing again. Jonah came running back just then, peach in hand, sticky juice all ready on his fingers. "Mommy! I found the squishiest one!" I smiled at him. "Perfect." Marianne didn't say goodbye. She just turned, disappeared into the crowd like a shadow behind a curtain. But her words stayed. Not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to bleed later. I didn't tell him right away. We finished at the market, drove home. Jonah fell asleep in the back seat with juice on his chin and a half-eaten peach still wrapped in a napkin. But my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I kept replaying Marianne's voice in my head. Calm, precise, surgical. And more than anything, I kept hearing the quiet threat. Be smart. Walk away. By the time we pulled into Eli's driveway, my stomach was in knots. I carried Jonah upstairs and tucked him in without waking him. Then I went back down to the kitchen where Eli was rinsing vegetables from the market like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, just watching him, his sleeves rolled up, his brow slightly furrowed, the curve of his jaw catching the light. There was a time I used to think this version of him was untouchable, that his calm was something I could never match. Now I knew better. "Eli," I said quietly. He looked up, wiped his hands on a towel. "Everything okay?" "No." I said it plainly. No softening, no build-up. He set the towel down slowly. "What happened?" "She was at the market." His body tensed before I even said the name. "Your mother," I added. The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't ask how she found me. He didn't ask what she said. He already knew. What did she do? She cornered me, I said. Started talking about your IPO, public image, investors. Told me to walk away again, quietly this time. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitch beneath his skin. Jonah was 10 feet away, I said, voice tightening. She looked at him like he was a problem to be managed. Eli ran both hands through his hair, pacing now. I told you I should have warned her, he muttered. No, this wasn't about warning. She knew exactly what she was doing. He stopped pacing, turned to me, eyes sharp. She doesn't speak for me. She thinks she does. Well, she's wrong. There was something raw in his voice now. Not just anger, guilt, a lifetime of it. She did this before, I said. You didn't know, but she asked me to leave. She made me believe I didn't belong in your life, that I'd ruin it. He looked gutted. I didn't want to believe she could go that far, he said. I thought she just didn't know how to show approval. But this is control. And it ends now. I looked at him, really looked. And I saw it. The shift. Eli wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't hesitating. He was angry, yes, but also awake. For the first time, I saw the man I used to love not just reacting, but choosing. I'm not letting her near him again, he said. Not if she sees him as leverage. Not if she sees you as a threat. You think she'll back down? He stepped closer. No, but I don't care. Even if it costs you something? I asked. With your company? He didn't blink. Nothing is worth more than my son, and nothing gives her the right to speak to you that way. I felt the weight of his words settle into my chest, like bricks rearranged into a home I didn't know I could still have. I'm scared, I whispered. Not of her, of hoping. He reached for my hand. I can't erase the past, he said, voice steady. But I can show up for the future, every single day. I looked down at our hands, his fingers curling gently around mine, solid, warm, shaking just slightly. I'll protect both of you, he said, no matter what it costs. And this time, I believed him. The meeting wasn't scheduled. He didn't call ahead, didn't give her time to prepare. Just showed up at a penthouse in the middle of a weekday when he knew her assistant would be out to lunch and the security guard downstairs wouldn't question his name. Marianne opened the door in a silk blouse and pearls, holding a glass of white wine she hadn't even sipped. Eli, she said, surprised. I wasn't expecting. We need to talk. Her smile faltered for half a second, just long enough to let him see it. Then she stepped aside and let him in. He walked past the foyer, past the framed art and curated orchids, and straight into the sitting room where she always staged the illusion of calm. He didn't sit. I know what you did, he said. She sighed, setting her wine down with the same grace she used at charity galas. I assume this is about the market? You cornered Rachel. You threatened her, in front of Jonah. I spoke to her, yes. You intimidated her. I offered perspective. You undermined my son's mother in public. You made her feel unsafe, again. Marianne's eyes narrowed slightly. The performance slipped another inch. I did what I've always done, she said coolly. Protected your interests. No, Eli said. You protected your version of me, the one you built, the one who never needed a family because you decided one wasn't part of the plan. She stood still, arms crossed, the way she used to when he was 15 and coming home with questions she didn't like. "You think I'm the villain here?" Eli didn't blink. "You're not the villain. You're the echo of every decision I didn't make for myself." She let out a sharp breath. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? You're weeks away from going public. One scandal, one article, and you could lose millions control of the board, your company." "Then let me lose it." She went silent. "I would rather lose everything than teach my son to value power over people. I won't let you use him, or Rachel, not as threats, not as leverage." "And what," she said, voice brittle now, "will the world say when they find out you have a secret child you never acknowledged?" Eli stepped forward, quiet but firm. "I'll tell them myself, on my terms, before you or anyone else can spin it." She blinked, like she hadn't expected him to mean it. "You'd really go public with that? Risk the company?" "Yes. Even if it costs you everything?" "It already cost me 4 years," he said. "That's enough." He let the silence hang, then continued. "I've contacted our PR team. If anything leaks anything at all, connected to you, we'll know, and I'll go on the record." Her hands, always so still, finally moved, folding into each other like a nervous reflex. "You'd throw me under the bus?" "No, I'd tell the truth, that you threatened the mother of my child and tried to erase both of them." "You think they'll sympathize with her? With you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because she could already see it in his eyes. This wasn't negotiation. This was declaration. "I'm not here to prove I'm a good man," he said. "I'm here to be a father. If that threatens you, then maybe you never really knew me." She stared at him, and for the first time in years, Eli saw something break in her posture. Not regret, not quite, but something like distance. Like she realized she'd lost the part of him she always controlled. "I loved you," she said softly. "I believe you," he replied, "but love doesn't give you the right to rewrite my life." He turned and walked out. Didn't look back. This time, the line wasn't blurred. It was sharp, uncrossable. And for once, he wasn't the one left wondering if he should have said more. I found the envelope on the porch the next morning. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, in her handwriting. Elegant, deliberate, like everything else about her. Eli was upstairs brushing Jonah's teeth. I stood in the doorway, barefoot, bathrobe knotted tight around my waist, the cold from the tile floor climbing up my spine as I held the envelope like it might explode. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. But I did. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. Creamy thick, embossed with her initials in gold, and her words, neat and sharp. "You've won, for now. But remember, stability is fragile, and people forget fast. Protect your version of the truth while you still can." M. No signature, no warmth, just control, repackaged as a courtesy. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back into the envelope, walked into the kitchen, and slid it into the drawer where we kept expired coupons and batteries that probably didn't work. When Eli came down, I didn't mention it. Not yet. Because I knew how he'd react, how the quiet fury behind his eyes would ignite all over again. And after yesterday's confrontation, after drawing a line with the only parent he'd ever really had, I didn't want to throw gasoline on what was already burning. Instead, I poured him coffee and kissed the side of his jaw like nothing had happened. But later that afternoon, while Jonah was napping and the house was still, I sat on the edge of our bed and finally let myself feel it. Not fear exactly, but the edge of it. Because Marianne had backed down, yes. But the way predators retreat, not the way people surrender. She was smart, patient. She'd planted something in that note, and she knew it. A seed of doubt. What if Eli changed his mind? What if the world turned against us? What if love wasn't enough to hold all of this together? I hated that she still had that power, even without being in the room, even with Eli choosing us, fully and loudly. I pressed my palms into my knees, closed my eyes, and breathed in deep. Tried to remember what it felt like before her voice crept back in, before that single sheet of paper unsettled the foundation. I was only just starting to trust. And then, from down the hall, I heard Jonah's small voice calling for me. Just like that, the fog lifted. Because he didn't care about legacy or public perception. He didn't care about share prices or threats sealed in elegant envelopes. He cared that I showed up when he called, and so did Eli. We weren't perfect, we weren't safe from everything, but we were standing in the open now. And that had to be enough, for today, at least. The park was nothing special. No fountains, no manicured gardens or fancy equipment, just grass that needed trimming, a few chipped picnic tables, and a tired old slide that creaked every time a kid flew down it. But Jonah loved it. And this Sunday morning, under a sky so blue it looked painted, it became our whole world. Eli was chasing him through the grass, arms out like a monster, growling just enough to make Jonah scream with laughter. The kind of laugh that comes from the belly, messy, loud, and completely free. I sat on a worn bench nearby, coffee cup warming my hands, watching them. Jonah ran in wild circles, giggling, until Eli caught him around the waist and hoisted him into the air. Jonah flailed and kicked playfully, shouting, "I'm flying! I'm flying!" "You're heavy!" Eli laughed, spinning him once before gently setting him down. "What do you eat? Cement?" "Chicken nuggets," Jonah declared proudly, brushing grass off his pants. I smiled. It was such a small thing, this moment, and yet it felt monumental, not because it was grand, but because it was real. The way Eli looked at him now, not just curious, not just careful, but in awe, like he was watching something he never thought he'd get to hold. And Jonah, for his part, had taken to Eli in a way I hadn't expected. Not instantly, but naturally. As if some invisible part of him had recognized the safety in this man's voice, the rhythm of it, the shape. He still didn't know everything. We hadn't explained the word father yet. We were giving it time, letting the bond come first, without weight. And it was coming. In shared jokes, in matching scraped knees, in the way Jonah reached for his hand without thinking. Eli joined me on the bench, while Jonah ran off to the sandbox with 2 other kids. He was a little winded, a little sweaty. His shirt had a grass stain on the back, and he didn't seem to notice or care. "He's fast," he said, catching his breath. "He gets that from my side," I teased. "I get it now," he said, almost to himself. I turned to him. "Get what?" "Why you protected him so fiercely. Why you were so afraid." His eyes stayed on Jonah. "It's not just love," he said. "It's instinct, like something rewired inside me overnight." I nodded, eyes stinging just slightly. "I used to think I had to choose," I admitted. "Between telling you and keeping him safe, between truth and peace." He looked at me then, really looked. "You never have to choose again," he said. We sat there in silence, watching our son dig tunnels in the sand, unaware of everything we'd fought through to get here. I reached for Eli's hand, lacing my fingers with his. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something to fill. It felt like home. I used to think closure meant finishing something. That once you closed a chapter, the book got quieter, simpler, lighter. But now, sitting by the window of a house I never planned to return to, watching Jonah sort crayons by color on the floor, listening to Eli hum some off-key tune from the kitchen, I realize closure isn't the end. It's the permission to begin. And we're beginning. Not with grand declarations or sweeping forgiveness, not with a clean slate. Life doesn't hand out those kinds of gifts. We've got baggage, all three of us. Eli is still learning how to be a father. He fumbles sometimes, over bedtime routines, over tiny socks, over questions he doesn't know how to answer. But every night, he's there, tucking Jonah in, reading the same dinosaur book for the 6th time, showing up. And that matters more than perfection ever could. Jonah, he's still too young to understand the full weight of how we got here. But he knows love. He knows safety. He knows that when he wakes from a bad dream, someone's always close by. He knows Eli is someone he can run to. And me? I'm still scared some days, that everything might fall apart again. That love isn't enough to hold the line when life pushes back. That one morning I'll wake up and find myself outside another locked door. But I'm also stronger now. Not because I fought alone, but because I stopped. Because I let someone in again. Because I chose to stop surviving long enough to start living. The funny thing is, none of this was the plan. I was supposed to disappear, stay gone, protect Jonah by never looking back. And yet here we are, 3 people building something not out of certainty, but out of choice. Sometimes that's the better foundation. We don't say forever, not yet. We say things like, "See you tonight," or "I got the groceries," or "Can you grab him from school?" We say things that mean, "I'm here, still here, not going anywhere today." And maybe that's braver. Maybe always is too big, too fragile. But today? Today is something I can hold in my hands, something we're building one morning at a time.